Another big way of trying to address your own love life issues before becoming aware of what you've learned is trying to change your partner. People do this all the time. I'm going to love them to death and make a better man out of them. She'll fall in love with me and give up her bad habits if I love her. I have been in practice many years. I've never found a successful case of doing that. The basic principle is if somebody doesn't want to change, they don't change.
Yes.
Period. You got two choices.
Hello, and welcome to another amazing episode of TMC, where we are here to help you take your relationship from surviving to thriving.
And if this is your first time joining us, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any amazing episodes.
Today on TMC, we have a very special guest, Dr. Thomas Jordan, with Changing Unhealthy Relationships.
Clinical psychologist, a psychoanalyst. I teach at NYU postdoc psychoanalytic work. I'm the author of a book called Learn to Love, Guide to Healing Your Disappointing Love Life, which I published a couple of years ago. And I have a website called lovelifelearningcenter.com. My specialty is unhealthy love lives. I've been studying that area of work, not exclusively, but as a project for about 32 years. I work with my wife, Victoria. She's a clinical social worker and also an analyst here in New York. We have a group practice together. I'm very interested in love life stuff. I have an interesting perspective, I think, to add to other perspectives about love life, especially relationship perspectives. I believe love life changes can be made from the inside out. Okay. Psychological love life is of particular interest to me, so I'm hoping that we can talk about that at some point.
And you said that you have studied unhealthy love life. So tell us a little bit about unhealthy love life. What does that look like?
In my book, I talk about the disappointing love life as a phenomenon, right? And the disappointing love life has three parts to it. One is repetition of disappointments. People, for example, might see me in my office and talk about 3 or 4 relationships that were disappointing with unavailable partners, for example. Another quality is there's replication of unhealthy relationship experiences from their past, in particular, the family of origin. A part that I'm particularly interested in is how people recreate these repetitions and replications based on what they've learned from those unhealthy relationship experiences. That's a big deal for me. I believe learning is involved. The good news is it's one of our greatest assets. It's a user-friendly concept. If we can learn, we can unlearn once we've become conscious of what we've learned and learn something better. So I wanted to write a guidebook that people could read and start stimulating their consciousness so they can start applying it in ways that help them.
I want you to dig a little bit more into the learn and unlearn, because this is really interesting. And I know, as we live our lives, our background, our history, where we come from, the trauma that we dealt with, a lot of people don't realize that those things are affecting them right now, affecting the way they think, affecting the relationship, future relationships. I want you to kind of dig into that.
In the course of looking at people's love lives over the years, in my practice, I collected 12 unhealthy relationship experiences that kept showing up over and over again. For example, abuse, abandonment, neglect, dishonesty, self-centeredness, intrusiveness, exploitation. And these unhealthy relationship experiences were the ones that I was able to see were creating that repetition and replication. So I wanted to understand what kind of learning experience people have when they're exposed to these experiences, because your love life basically starts the moment you're born. I define love life as any and all relationships involving the emotion of love starting at the beginning of life.
Wow.
So if that's your love life, then relationship experiences, for example, are big. Cedric, you pointed out that there's an unconscious element to it, and I think that's extremely important. Yeah. The trouble is this learning takes place without our awareness. We learn a lot by observation, the type of relationships we have, even instruction. Sometimes, you could be a 10-year-old kid and your uncle or your aunt takes you aside and say, make sure you marry a woman, make sure you marry a man, and instruct you on love life issues.
Wow.
Now, that's a little more conscious, but usually what we learn is through observation, how our parents relate, how our sisters and brothers relate, the type of love lives they have. So we're gathering all kinds of information. I'm going to give you an example, preserving confidentiality, of course, but I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about, unconscious learning. A woman in her 50s came to see me a while ago, telling me in an initial interview that she grew up in a home with an alcoholic father who was abusive to her mother. Her siblings and her observed this abuse, physical and emotional abuse. And when she grew up, as I gathered more information about her adult life, she told me she married 2 alcoholic abusive men and was working on a third. He was a boyfriend at the time. So as I gathered this information, there was a point, and I remember this so vividly because of how she reacted to my statement. At one point in the interview, I turned to her and I said, do you think that what you lived through when you were young is related to the choices you're making now as an adult woman? And she looked at me. Now, this is an educated, middle-aged person. She looked at me like, what? And that look on her face was very important. Of course, it became the launching pad from which to make that connection, because as she made that connection, she was able to say, wow, I'm replicating and repeating unhealthy patterns here. And the real tragedy of it is that you can do that over and over again until you get to what I like to call resignation. Wow. Resignation happens when you say, the hell with love. And I know this exists because I wrote a post on my website a while ago, living without love in your life. And I have to tell you, I got a deluge of people writing responses. I read all of them, commentary, people telling me that they were giving up on love because of the following reasons. So there are a lot of people out there who are resigned to not fooling around with love. It's too hurtful, it's too disappointing, and they've gotten to that stage of resignation. I think that's a tragedy.
Wow.
I really do. Podcasts that I've done and talks that I've given, I always like to start off with the statement that most of us are not in control of our love lives. And people usually look at that like, what are you talking about? And I like to provide an initial proof of that reason. 50% of first marriages fail. That's throwing a dice. That's chance.
Yeah.
It gets worse. Second marriages, 60%. And third marriages, 73%. We can do better than that.
Yeah.
That divorce statistic has been bothering me for a very long time. It stays steady. It's relentless. I think there's a learning experience taking place that has to be addressed. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote my book. Another reason I just want to mention briefly, I made changes in my own love life when I was in my late 30s and 40s in a therapy experience with a doctor who had a sensitivity for love life issues. And this guy pointed out that I was using something I learned from my mother that wasn't healthy in my love life over and over again. And as a consequence, I was having disappointing experiences. My mother briefly never really had a separation experience from her parents. Parents lived upstairs. She never really separated. 4 kids. My father worked for his father-in-law. So she was a dependent person. She had dependency. She had control issues. She was a little bit self-centered in her emotional orientation. So I took those qualities, and an eligible woman had all 3 of them as far as I was concerned, unconsciously. I had not thought it out. So here's the real kicker. I found people that had those qualities, but if I found someone who didn't, I imagined they did. That's how strong that blueprint or template was in my mind.
Yeah.
I was projecting it onto people. So once I realized, he pointed out to me, you're using your mother's blueprint, he said to me. So I was able to stop dating for a while. I started doing some soul searching. We talked more about it. I really moved through this process of realizing that I had to separate from what I learned, unlearn it basically, and find something better. So I got it in my mind that I had to go looking for the opposite, an independent woman, not controlling woman, and a woman who was capable of intimacy and not self-centeredness. A couple of years later, Victoria showed up, and I've been married ever since.
Wow.
So I wanted to take that process and write it out into a straightforward, step-by-step, I call it the Unlearning Method, that people could read the book, stimulate their consciousness of what's going on, and see what the steps of change would entail.
Dr. Jordan, you have just said a mouthful already. And you talked a little bit about your Unlearn method. So could you introduce us to that method just a little bit? Tell us maybe a couple of steps and how can someone use that?
What I call the Unlearning Method, step one is always consciousness, becoming aware, identifying what's been learned. Now, I'm going to mention two little, I call them after effects, two ways in which people try to deal with the disappointments in their own love life when they're not aware of what they've learned. They become defensive in their love life. They give up on love, as I already mentioned. That's one big defense. Another one is they stay distant in love relationships. And there's 1,000 different ways to do that. Or they create conflict, because conflict creates that distance. So these are different ways that people use defensiveness to deal with the fact that they've learned something, but they don't know what it is. Another big way of trying to address your own love life issues before becoming aware of what you've learned is trying to change your partner. People do this all the time. I'm going to love them to death and make a better man out of them. She'll fall in love with me and give up her bad habits if I love her. I have been in practice many years. I've never found a successful case of doing that. The basic principle is if somebody doesn't want to change, they don't change. Period. You got two choices: accept the person that you're in love with because they're faults you can live with, as an old friend used to say to me, or leave and find someone else who reaches that person you're thinking of in your mind. So those two after effects from unhealthy relationship experiences are common ways that people try to fix the fact that multiple disappointments are taking place in their love life. Okay, so the Unlearning Method. Step one is identify what I call your psychological love life. Now let's go my way. My contribution to love life issues, fixing love life issues, is to examine what's on the inside, gets brought to the party, so that comes with you when you enter the love life world. That's what I wanted to add. I'm a psychologist, so I'm interested in the psychology. So what's in the psychological love life? If we could dissect it, it's somewhere in your mind. Chances are it's unconscious. We've already established that. So the first thing you're going to find is those unhealthy relationship experiences that got into your love life. Some do and some don't. Usually people don't know which ones have gotten in because they're unconscious of it. But those memories, those relationship experiences are in there in the form of memories. Another thing is what we identified, what we've learned from those experiences. That's also in our psychological love life. And these after effects I mentioned as ways to deal with love life problems. All of that is in what I like to call your psychological love life. To identify that, you got to start asking yourself questions. Who taught me about love relationships? Now, if I ran down the street on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and I said, "Excuse me, lady, who taught you about love relationships?" She'd look at me and say, "Get out of here, crackpot." What is he talking about? People don't ask themselves that question. Yet you can imagine how powerful it is. My mother taught me about love relationships. My father a little, my mother a lot. My mother defined for me what an eligible woman looks like, and I went looking for that. And had I not changed it, I think I'd have been divorced a couple of times and very disappointed. So once it's identified, you're asking yourself questions like, who taught me about love relationships? How did I learn about them? Was I instructed? Did I learn as a consequence of being in a relationship with someone in the family? Did I learn by observation, which is a very, very, very powerful way to learn when you're a child? You're absorbing all kinds of stuff because you're watching. You know when mom and dad are fighting. You know when they're arguing behind closed doors. You know when they're hating on each other, or somebody lied, or somebody's cheating. You know those things as a child because you're picking up that information. It's a classroom, a powerful classroom. And the real tragedy of it is the way these learned lessons, when they're unhealthy. Now, if they're healthy, hey, none of my business. You'll probably set up a healthy love life. You don't have to be aware of it. But if they're unhealthy, consciousness must be the first step because consciousness empowers us. We are a conscious being. To develop consciousness permits us to make change. Consciousness is related to change. So, step 2, once you're aware of the patterns, you can see what's being repeated and replicated, and you know that you're recreating this in your love life. The 3 R's: repetition, replication, recreation. You're recreating this in your love life. Step 2 is to begin the process of unlearning. And step 2 involves a challenge to disrupt this automatic unconscious pattern from dominating your love life. We human beings possess all kinds of resources. When we enter the process of change, it usually starts with a conflict between what we've learned and what we want to change. So we are in that, what I like to call therapeutic conflict, because it's not a bad place to be, even though it might feel lousy. When people make changes, they have this back and forth going on. Now, what you've learned is powerful. It's strong. It's been practiced. You've seen mom and dad do it, Uncle Joe and Aunt Mary. You've got powerful forces behind that learning. But if you're interested in changing your love life, and love is an extremely powerful motivator, then you're going to enter into this process of figuring out how to stop automatic behavior from being replicated. Now, I look at things like what we believe about love, how we behave in a love relationship, and what we feel about love relationships. Belief, behavior, and feelings, and I talk about it in my book, they define the learning that takes place. I'll give you an example. A woman comes to see me and says, in the course of a conversation, all men cheat. All men cheat. When you're not watching them, they're dogging all kinds of women. And you know that. And if you were honest as a man, you'd confirm that for me. That's a belief. Now I start thinking as an analyst, what did she witness in her life that gave her that belief?
Oh my goodness.
What kind of dishonesty was she exposed to? What kind of underhanded, this one's cheating on that one, people talking about it, people showing the effects of it, people reacting. She developed this belief about love relationships. And that belief, you don't have to think about it. Just the way I said it gives you an idea of how powerful that could be in the back room.
Yes, sir.
So if I meet a man who cheats and I get that belief, I ain't saying goodbye to him. And he doesn't even have to act like a cheater. He can show me subtle signs at the beginning. And I say to myself, and here's a dirty word that's nice and bad at the same time, it's familiar. By the way, you know what the root of familiar is? Family.
Wow.
Familia. So belief, big, powerful area of learning. The second one is behavior, how people behave in a love relationship. I worked with a person once. She said to me, I got to stop finding alcoholic men. My boyfriends, my husband, too much drinking. I really want to find a sober man. So we were yucking it up a little bit. She's an interesting person with a great sense of humor. I said, wait a minute. If I put a party together with 50 guys, they're all eligible. One's an alcoholic, not a drop of booze at the party. Are you going to be talking to him at the end of the night? Wow. She laughed. She said, yeah, I know where they are.
Wow.
I can spot them. As she thought about it, she began to recount the behavioral part of the learning. how she gravitated towards men who drank a little too much, how it was also familiar, reminded her of her father's behavior in her family of origin. So the behavior can be very much a part of this unconscious learning. People gravitate toward what they are familiar with, believing that the choices are entirely conscious, but unless you're aware of what you've learned, there's a big question mark on that. Now, here's the third part, feelings. Emotions are defined as what we bring biologically as human beings into life. The emotion of love, the emotion of sadness, the emotion of anger. These are emotions that we can biologically experience. They're the emotional trademark of human beings. The word feelings, if I took a little bit of emotion, mixed it with a little bit of learning, I would have what's called feelings. Because feelings develop when you have experiences that have both emotion and learning in them. So if I have a feeling of excitement when I'm around a non-committal man who's not emotionally available because I was abandoned early in life and I end up finding these uncommitted men, what is that excited feeling telling me? I think what it's telling me is that the familiar has feelings attached to it. Unconsciously, I can identify by feelings the type of people that match what I experienced earlier in my life. So you got beliefs, behaviors, and feelings all geared towards repetition and replication of familiar, unhealthy relationship experiences over and over and over again until you get sick of it. Now, step two, you're aware of these patterns, you're challenging them. You're saying to yourself, no, I can't do that. You're talking about it. You're putting it in a journal. You're telling a counselor or a therapist, I think I've met the same kind of guy I usually end up with. I got to do something different. I went on a date last night. I got to talk about it because I want to know if this is the same kind of woman I'm always finding or it's somebody different. So the consciousness applied now for the purpose of unlearning challenges what's unconscious, using consciousness, looking for signs that it is replicating or repeating, and now you're opposing, disrupting an automatic process. That begins the unlearning. Step three in the unlearning process is you're going to go in the opposite direction. The opposite of abandonment is commitment. The opposite of abuse is respect. The opposite of neglect is devotion. The opposite of self-centeredness is intimacy. All of these unhealthy relationship experiences have an opposite, and the opposite is therapeutic. So if somebody's sitting in my office and saying, I really got to stop finding these narcissistic men or women, the relationship goes nowhere. I do it over and over again. We start exploring what's the opposite. What does an intimate man feel like? What does an intimate, the opposite of self-centered, intimate, mutual, person who can exchange intimacies with you? What does that look like? How does that feel? Does it feel comfortable? I've had patients tell me, an emotionally available man, because this woman had an abandonment experience early in life by her father. So she found herself with unavailable men over and over again, men who acted like they were emotionally available, who weren't. They were either married or another relationship, or they just weren't emotionally available for whatever reason. So when she got through step two and was able to really identify the pattern, mess with it, stop looking for that kind of guy, we were talking about, where are the intimate men? How to identify them? And she admitted to me one day, she said, Doctor, this scares out of me. Why? Because I'm unfamiliar with this kind of man. I don't know what an intimate man feels like, looks like. I never had one in my life. You can pick up the vulnerability that's in that, right? That's a person who's moving towards change, but needs a little help getting there. That's a person who is going to study what intimacy looks like in the process of doing it. For example, if she came back the next session and said to me, I had a date with the guy I talked about last week and we exchanged stories. He was very nice to me. He told me about relationships in the past, asked me about my experiences as well. There was a lot of sharing. There was a lot of mutual stuff going on between us. I say to her, it's starting to look like an intimate guy. Let's see where this goes. Let's go down that path a little. If you start experiencing a consistency in that, maybe this is the kind of guy who's going to bring this love life of yours in a different direction. Now, she's aware of it. She's not just going out there, dance and have a good time. She's doing that too, but she's thinking in her mind. She's conscious. She's applying consciousness to the learning process involved in love life, choices, and experiences. That makes the difference. Repetition is easy to spot, by the way. If you're keeping a journal, if you're talking to friends, if you have a counselor, boy, all these guys I meet, they're all the same for some reason. That book that guy wrote, I mean, put that idea in my mind. That's kind of crazy. Maybe I'm finding the same kind of men over and over again. And so when you start asking questions like that of yourself, you're disrupting that learning process. You're pulling that guy out of the closet so you can look at it. You're saying, wait a minute, let me stop for a moment, do some introspection and think about, ask questions of myself. What am I doing to create this repetition? Am I looking for this kind of person over and over again? Wait a minute. He's a lot like my mother or my father or my uncle. Is this pattern continuing because it's familiar? When you start asking questions like that of yourself, you're putting your love life on the workbench. You're looking at it. And that kind of consciousness applied in the form of, let's stop the show. Let's stop looking for a minute and let's examine what's in this head that gets translated into belief, behavior, and feelings. Let's look at it. Whoa, look at this. I'm repeating this over and over again. I keep doing that for another 20 years. I'm going to be unhappy, resigned to unhappiness in my love life. So examining what we've learned is a very powerful interference. That consciousness can be used to disrupt unconscious experiences that are replicating.
Dr. Jordan, while you were talking, I went immediately on Amazon and I purchased the book. It would be.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, Dr. Jordan, you are giving the TMC listeners and us life-changing nuggets, because I've heard you say something over and over again. You said awareness so many times. You said consciousness. You said thinking. You said connecting.
Familiar.
Yes, what's familiar. You're talking about us going to a place and having a journal, a counselor, someone that we're talking this out with, not just saying every relationship I get in there like this, every relationship is unhealthy, but you're talking about doing the deep dive into where this comes from and why I keep finding myself here.
Working on your love life.
Exactly. I even heard you say that for a moment in your life that you stopped dating. You just pulled back and you were working on leaving that blueprint that was given to you by your mom, that love life blueprint. And I think that sometimes as people, we don't know, but we don't do those steps. We're not aware. We're not conscious. We're not asking ourselves, how do I keep ending up in these type of relationships?
And it's possible to work on your love life. I like that phrase. We work on everything else. Yeah. We work on our financial lives, our academic lives, our occupational lives, our medical lives, our physical lives. Why not our love life? And you know why? I have a little theory. My theory is the family of origin has been a sacred place. I believe that. In the 20th century, we didn't mess with the family of origin. We knew abuses were going on, but we were very careful about looking into them, just the way law enforcement would handle domestic violence or child abuse. I mean, we were very careful about unpacking the family of origin as a classroom that teaches us how to live in the world as adults. So I'm still, and I mentioned this in my book, I'm very careful. I respect the family of origin, but when we become adults, we have to liberate ourselves into the love lives we deserve.
Absolutely.
We are all born
Absolutely.
with the capacity to love. What we do with that depends on what kind of relationship we set up. We can set up a relationship that kills the love we feel. We can set up a relationship that grows the love we feel. So, and I mentioned this in my book. In my preface, I say, this is not a book about love. This is a book about love relationships. That's what we can change. It's a wonderful phenomenon. When it comes, then we set up a relationship to contain it, either in a healthy way or not healthy way. That's what we can do something about.
And that's a saying. I've been hearing this saying my whole life. Do as I say and not as I do.
That is bad news. Now, I got news for that elder. That child is copying what that elder does,
Amen.
not what they say. That story is about ignorance of the elder. That would be the label for that story. Very powerful story, because a lot of people do that. That has no appreciation for what's going on unconsciously. When you say that to a child, you're making the child think of the difference between what you do and what you say. They know both. They have registered both. And I got news for you, based on the years of practice working with this problem, they follow the behavior, not what they're told.
And this really explains that we're Christians, and that there's people, they live a certain way at home, different they live at church, and wonder why their child grow up and want to disassociate themselves from Christianity. And I mean, it's the same thing. It's just what they see.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I'm also a Christian, by the way, just to put my hat in the ring as well. And you know, Jesus was a lover.
Yes.
Big time. Big time.
He
What's his 2 rules of loving? Love thy father, love thy neighbor.
Yes.
You bet. He's talking about love. Love. So he knew back then that was the most powerful human experience going. We're just trying to catch up with him.
You know, love is just, it's just something, it's there. It comes from God. We get it. We're born with it. So from the day you come here, you already have it. But you talked about the relationships that we have. It's how we contain it. It's how we contain that thing. And I was like, wow, that's just, sometimes as parents, we may not think that the things that we're doing is teaching our child how to contain their love the relationships connected to their love. We don't think that the things that we go through in relationships that they see is affecting them. Sometimes parents never have that conversation with their kids. I mean, I know that we do have some, because I remember talking to someone and they said that they had that conversation with their kids, but they said they were unaware the unhealthy relationship they were in was affecting their kids until years later. And it's just so freeing that whoever will listen to this podcast, you have just like unlocked so many doors. A lot of chains are broken. You unlocked so many doors for us on today. You've studied this for years. You have example after example. You have client after client, and you have facts and information to back it up. That these things that we learn and repeat is things that we see, things that were already embedded in us. Because I heard you say when you were talking, giving the example about the woman being on a date, you said she's now thinking. So she's enjoying the dance, she's enjoying the dinner, but listen, TMC listeners, she's also thinking. She's enjoying the dinner, she's enjoying the dance,
and she's feeling. And she's checking her feelings. For example, there are some people who they enter unhealthy relationships and they don't pay attention to what's in the gut. The gut might be saying, run away. And they're saying, no, this guy's got a great hairdo. He's got plenty of money in his pocket. He's got a nice ride outside. Everything's cool. He's a great guy. He brought me flowers. Oh, yeah, he brought me flowers. I'm going to make him into the honest man I know he can be. Feeling in my gut is being ignored completely. That's a problem. So it's not only thinking, it's paying attention to the experience, which includes thinking, how you're acting, rather than jumping in. Spend a little time talking to the person that you're with. Listen to the stories. Look for evidence that this is a healthy possibility, not an unhealthy possibility. And that consciousness helps. I want to bring this full circle back to the divorce rate. I have to tell you, the divorce rate bothers me big time.
Yes,
Mhm.
same here.
Because what we're talking about, the 50% that don't make it, they're doing what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
repeating unconscious patterns over and over again.
Yes.
That can be changed. There's no reason. There was I don't know if you've ever heard the name Leo Buscaglia. Have you ever heard this name before?
No,
Leo
no,
Buscaglia.
sir.
Okay. Leo Buscaglia was a doctor of education. I think it was the University of Southern California back in the 70s. Loving guy, real moist fella, loved emotions, loved people. He was teaching a course, and unfortunately, one of his students committed suicide due to a love life problem. He was so upset by that. He went to the administration of the university and said, listen, I need to teach a love class. My students don't know how to handle love. Love is a powerful experience. People are hurting themselves. I need to teach a love life. They laughed at him. Leo, don't you have better things to do? Come on. He persisted. They gave him a classroom, no credit. He taught that class for 4 years consecutively. 100 people enrolled, standing room only. What does that tell us? I don't think the University of Southern California has a love class on their roster these days. I would doubt it. But doesn't that tell us how important that class was?
Yes.
That young people need to understand love relationship issues, the phenomena of love, to be able to handle that experience, because it's so powerful in our lives. Whether we're getting it healthy or unhealthy, it is one of the most powerful human experience there is. We have to pay attention to it. That's why I wrote the book. I have a PowerPoint presentation that teaches what's in the book that I'm going to try to get out there in the fall. So it's a bit of a project. Do my best.
Man, God bless you with everything that you're doing, all your endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If someone wants to connect with you and what you are doing, where should they go?
LoveLifeLearningCenter.com, my website. There's information about how to do that. I wrote the book as a guidebook so that people could read it and begin the process. And I've gotten some interesting feedback. Some people use the book and make changes right from the book. So whether or not you need support of a counselor or therapist, that's a question to ask. But sometimes just reading the book, a friend of mine read it a couple of times and started realizing that neglect that occurred in his early life, he can't be recreating it, finding people who have other relationships that are not going well. So he stopped that pattern, and he did that without a therapy experience. So I think it's possible to stimulate consciousness in a bunch of different ways. But the website has all of that information. So that's the way to do it. Working on your love life is a wonderful and important thing to do. And that's how people take control of their love lives and move it towards health. And that's how they take care of the love they experience. So I want to leave on that. I want to really encourage your listeners to think about working on their love lives. It's something that you can change. You don't have to accept unhappiness and disappointment over and over and over again. You can make changes, and good luck with that.
On behalf of the TMC community, we want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Thank you. Thank you, Cedric. Thank you, Shante. Thank you.
So we hope you enjoyed this episode today. And if you did, go ahead and subscribe.
Yes.
Click the like button and turn on your notifications so you'll be notified each time we upload a video.
Go ahead and leave a comment and let us know, what did you learn? What nuggets did you pull from this amazing episode? We definitely want to hear from you. So go ahead, comment right now.
And if you're listening on iTunes, rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps us get the word out. And we want to invite you to head on over to our leadership podcast, Lead to Greatness, where my husband is interviewing entrepreneurs and great leaders from all around the world every week.
So we want to thank you for joining us today on TMC. Looking forward to hanging out with you again on next week as we continue to help you take your relationship from surviving to thriving. Bye. See you next week.